Shoujo Kaigeki Revue Starlight is a film with many visual motifs. From the tomatoes to the trains to Position Zero, director Tomohiro Furukawa did not shy away from utilizing these motifs to represent the themes of the film. There is one motif in the film, however, that goes beyond just visual and pervades through both diegetic and non-diegetic elements.
Wild Scream Baroque!
This motif is absolutely everywhere in the film, from the dialogue, to the mise-en-scène, to the music, to even non-diegetic elements such as the title cards. This then leads to the question, what is Wild Scream Baroque? In the film we were told that it is
あなたたちが演じる終わりの続き。わがままで欲張りな観客が望む新しい舞台。
In short, Wild Scream Baroque is literally this movie, as it's both a sequel to the 2018 anime, and it's something that people presumably wanted. This is a perfectly fine answer for what Wild Scream Baroque is in the diegetic of the film, however it doesn't quite answer the follow-up question. Why is it called Wild Scream Baroque? In order to do that, we must first familiarize ourselves with Wide Screen Baroque. The term widescreen Baroque is one that originates from science fiction author Brian Aldiss in the introduction of the book Paradox Men by Charles L. Harness, and the phrase would later appear in Brian Aldiss' own book, The Trillion Year Spree, The True History of Science Fiction. Because of its origin in literature, one might think the term is well defined. This, however, is an incorrect assumption. Thankfully, there seems to be two general groups that the definition could fall under: definitions that describe widescreen Baroque as a subgenre of space opera, and definitions that describe widescreen Baroque more literally. In exploring all these definitions, it becomes possible to realize that all of them could be applied to this movie, specifically in the form of the movie's 5 musical action set pieces, or revues: Resentment, Co-Star, Hunting, Soul, and The Last Line. Let's first start off with the definition of widescreen Baroque that's most commonly found. Inside the Oxford Dictionary of Science Fiction, we can find the definition: widescreen Baroque is a subgenre of science fiction characterized by larger-than-life characters, violence, intrigue, extravagant settings or actions, and fast-paced plotting. Well, we certainly already have larger-than-life characters, with both characters in this review being an heiress to a Japanese dance school and her childhood friend. But in the review, they also take on roles such as a Yakuza dice house dealer, a deco truck driving delinquent, a detective, and a femme fatale. These roles are larger than life because they immediately grab your interest due to how different they are from the characters normally. This also then presents a sense of intrigue because you ask, why are these characters playing these roles? And in search of answers for this, you gain a deeper understanding of their characters within the world of Revue Starlight. The intrigue also comes from other elements in the review, such as the extravagant settings and actions, flashy shows of violence, and of course the fast-paced plotting, shown by how this review absolutely refuses to stay in one setting as we move from a gambling house, to a pagoda, to a jazz bar, and back to the pagoda over the course of 5 minutes. As for the science fiction part, I guess you could count these deco trucks as science fiction, but more on that later. For now, we'll move on to our next review and definition. If you remember from the beginning, the source of widescreen Baroque comes from an introduction by Brian Aldiss in Charles L. Harness' book Paradox Men. This, however, will not be the only time someone tries to use Paradox Men to define widescreen Baroque. In an article about the relationship between melodrama and Paradox Men, author Norman Hills defines widescreen Baroque as a model of the melodramatic form in science fiction. Well then, what are the elements of melodrama? Encyclopedia Britannica defines melodrama as sentimental drama with an improbable plot that concerns the vicissitudes suffered by the virtuous at the hands of the villainous but ends happily with the virtue triumphant. Okay, let's start with a quick background on this review. In the prequel, My Hero and Karen were roommates, but then Karen's childhood friend Akari moved in, and while the love triangle at statement of melodrama isn't explicitly stated, it can be inferred. Anyways, both the background and the current situation are pure representation of an improbable plot. What's more interesting is how both My Hero and Akari can both represent the virtuous and the villainous. If you remember, the Encyclopedia Britannica definition used the word vicissitude, which means a change of circumstances or fortune, typically one that is unwelcome or unpleasant. For Akari, she is virtuously trying to find Karen, who is lost physically and mentally, but experiences vicissitude when the villainous Mahiru tries to stop her through Olympic sports and violence. For Mahiru, while her actions don't seem virtuous, it even seems like she's attacking Akari for no reason at first, she still has the virtuous goal of trying to bring the shining stage girl out of Akari, while Akari is villainously refusing to participate, her reason for doing so reflected in the line,
舞台で演じないあなたがどんな顔してカレンちゃんに会うの?
If Hikari herself refuses to be a stage girl, then what will happen when she faces Karen, who has now lost her purpose for the stage? Thankfully, we will reach an ending with both virtues triumphant as Hikari is able to continue on her quest with renewed brilliance that allows her to properly face Karen, thanks to My Hero showing her that even despite her fears, she is still willing to act on the stage.
決めたから。舞台で生きていくって。
As for the science fiction part, let's just call this setup with these cats with voice boxes as future technology and move on. Finally, we move on to group 2 of our definitions, those that decide to interpret widescreen Baroque literally. In this case, we will look to science fiction writer Mariko Ohara, who proclaimed that widescreen Baroque is a kind of B-movie / space opera in which highly metaphysical issues are discussed, a hodgepodge of pop, and the avant-garde. Thankfully, this review is one of the best for discussing probably one of the strangest parts of this definition, metaphysical issues, i.e., issues dealing with the nature of being and reality. This review immediately tackles probably the most fundamental question when it comes to the nature of being, death, specifically with a scene alluding to Japanese ritual suicide. Why? Well, in the prequel anime, Nana's arc is about protecting her friends from the horrors of time by trapping them in a time loop. This of course gets stopped, and it's Juna who is able to pick Nana up, ensuring that one must seize their own star, and that change is natural. Then why the change in attitude? Well, in the movie, Juna has taken a much more measured approach when it comes to her future. Specifically, she's the only one of the main cast, not counting Karen, who chooses to go to college as opposed to continuing to perform. This is also reflected in her line from earlier in the movie, shown now at the beginning of this review.
今の私じゃ経験も練習してきた時間も足りない。舞台に立つための覚悟だって全然。でも今はよ。
Thus, Nana decides to take a page out of Japanese writer Mishima Yukio's book and offer her a glorious end. Mishima Yukio and his philosophies in the President's Review could easily be their own video, and we really don't have time for that right now. This brings us to the second part of Mariko Ohara's quote, a hodgepodge of pop and avant-garde. On one hand, we have high school coming-of-age movie pop being contrasted against the ideals of Mishima Yukio, avant-garde. This juxtaposition between pop and avant-garde is even represented in the music, with this Ottoman meter section at the beginning, but this more rock-inspired section at the end. As for the space opera part, well, space opera is a subgenre of science fiction, and the way the stage moves looks futuristic and stuff, right? The next definition comes from writer Dr. Jerome Winter, who in an article described widescreen Baroque as the ornate stylistics of classical music and architecture bolted onto a sturdy cinematic chassis of stripped-down pulp, thrills, and pacing. Coincidentally, the classical music and architecture part of this review are quite literal, as the entire review homages and retells Goethe's Faust. In fact, out of all the reviews, it is the only one that's framed as a proper stage play in the beginning, with a sweeping shot of the theater in the previous scene, each section of the review being labeled as an act, and the backdrop and stage even being visible while they are performing. Music used for this is performed by an orchestra, and it even quotes the Romantic era song Pictures at an Exhibition, and this further enhances the classical stylings. As far as reviews go, this is as classical as you can get. However, at the climax of this review, the classical stylistics get stripped away as we get a proper cinematic climax of thrills complete with dynamic camera angles, a new added guitar providing energy to the background music, and the stage platform transforming into an intricate set of moving parts. However, the classical influences are still present throughout the entire sequence, as the set still has a Western castle influence reminiscent of Elizabethan drama, the score is still orchestral, and roses are scattered throughout the entire scene as an homage to the Rose of Versailles. As for the science fiction part, well, there isn't one. Finally, we reach the last definition. Tracing back all the way to an introduction to Paradox Men by Brian Aldiss himself, where he simply says, They obey a dictionary definition of Baroque, which is to say they have a bold and exuberant rather than a fine style. They are eccentric and sometimes degenerate into extravagance. They, like a widescreen with space and possibly time travel as props, and at least the whole solar system as their setting. While I assume this was the original, as the introduction was only found in the 1964, 1966, and 1976 versions of the book, which I can only find sellers in the UK for. For now, I'm just going to trust the online edition of the Science Fiction Encyclopedia. Anyways, I can think of no better words to describe this final review than bold, eccentric, and extravagant. Everything from start to finish oozes this idea of exuberance and eccentricity, from the use of CG in a 2D animated movie, the bold homage to Mad Max Fury Road, the eccentric visual metaphors, and most importantly, this review absolutely devolves into extravagance. Everything from the character movements, dialogue, lighting, these visual effects culminate into an absolute spectacle. Space itself is absolutely treated as a prop, not just here, but throughout the entire movie, as this all takes place on a plane outside of our reality, and well, who's to say whether all these reviews are utilizing the entire solar system or not. And with this, we finally get to... Throughout the video, you may have noticed that I continuously have tried to dodge the sci-fi elements found present in definitions for widescreen Baroque, and I might as well just come out and say it. Revue Starlight is not science fiction. While what qualifies as science fiction has always been notoriously hard to find, even a simple eye test can tell you that this movie does not feature even basic science fiction elements such as science and technology. This, however, brings me to my next question: should widescreen Baroque be restricted to just science fiction? If we remove the science fiction aspects of our previous definitions, then Group 1 definitions become more general and vague, with widescreen Baroque just becoming melodrama. However, Group 2 definitions are able to stand much stronger, demanding that the genre must have elements of widescreen, pop, and Baroque avant-garde. Then we can take a step back and define widescreen Baroque as melodrama that is bold and exuberant, the Baroque aspects, which, while being fast-paced, modern, and exciting, the widescreen aspects, which absolutely reflects both Paradox Men as well as Revue Starlight. However, the science fiction aspects of this widescreen Baroque shouldn't be completely ignored. One theme that exists throughout all the definitions is the space opera roots of widescreen Baroque, creating a piece of media that can only be described as grand or spectacle. This brings us back to our original question: should widescreen Baroque be restricted to science fiction? I don't think so, because after all, our revised definition is specific enough to not warrant every piece of melodrama be labeled widescreen Baroque. Should Revue Starlight be considered widescreen Baroque then? Absolutely. Not only does it show shades of melodrama while showcasing both elements of Baroque and widescreen, it also embodies the hidden factor of spectacle. After all, this movie is nothing but a superstar spectacle.